Hi, everyone. Welcome to our session called Affordable Housing and Environmental Justice, Bringing Equity to Brownfields. This is our last session of the conference, and it will tie in nicely with our theme of Communities Rising. Our speakers are Gloria Bruce, the Executive Director of East Bay Housing Organization, and Victor Rubin, a Senior Fellow from Policy Link. Please make sure, just as a reminder, that you submit your feedback for the conference by filling out a short survey available in the announcements. And please attend our world famous Brownfield sing-along that is happening right after this. There will be a Q&A with Victor and Gloria after their presentations, so please leave any questions in the Zoom chat rather than the Whova chat. Thank you, Victor and Gloria.
Thank you. And welcome everybody, and congratulations on going through the entire conference. I understand we're towards the end here, and just delighted to talk with you and provide a little context for the way in which land reuse, land recycling, brownfield remediation in California takes place. We're going to talk about affordable housing, and we're going to talk about environmental justice. We're probably going to toggle back and forth among project level issues at the level of programs and local and regional plans, and at the level of state policy. All of this is very important context for getting projects done, for framing them in light of what the goals are for the community where you're working, and for understanding a lot of recent developments in how community engagement gets carried out. The context is important with respect to what I'll call values for equitable development of communities. And by that, we generally mean that where you live should not constrain your opportunities in life, not your economic opportunity, certainly not your health, and not your opportunity to fully participate in civic life and in all dimensions of living in that community. And we know that the disparities across California are often very much defined by where people live and by the de facto racial segregation and income segregation that still defines a lot of our work. And we know that the challenges of citing and succeeding at developing affordable housing and the environmental injustices that we've seen are very much a reflection of inequities in race and class that California has grown up with. But what we're going to talk about are some of the ways in which the advocates and legislators and program officials and nonprofit leaders are trying to take on those issues. So we'll bring that back, we'll create that context in a way that we can talk about remediation, brownfields, and land recycling in that context. So I work for an organization called Policy Link, which is a 20-year-old national advocacy, research, and communications organization based here in Oakland, where I am today, with offices in Washington and New York. And we place a great amount of our time and effort here in California at the state level, as well as in cities and regions all over the state. We are centrally focused on this idea of racial and economic equity and economic development. I'm an urban planner by background, former adjunct faculty at Berkeley, former HUD official, and had the opportunity to be a generalist rather than a specialist in this or any other kind of work. So no questions about vapor intrusion or anything that deals with the technicalities or the precision and specialties that you are all often, many of you are immersed in. But hopefully this context about planning will be helpful. My other connection that brings me here today is membership in something called the California Planning Roundtable, which is a member group of about 35 planners from around California who take on policy issues in affiliation with the California chapter of the American Planning Association to try to move the field forward. And we've been very interested in these issues of how environmental justice gets worked into planning, how the state can develop new strategies for affordable housing. And it's through the California Planning Roundtable that I made many of the connections, which I'm going to talk about in my work. And many of the people that our other speaker, Gloria Bruce, works with are also connected to the roundtable in one way or another. So we're each going to talk for 10 minutes, maybe 15 at the most, respectively, about affordable housing and environmental justice and what it may mean for land recycling. And then we'll open it up to questions. The chat function is open. We'll be checking that as we go along. I'll be putting up some URLs that are links to the websites that I'm going to show when I give my talk. But we'd like it to be in the last 15, 20 minutes as informal as possible and dig into whatever is of interest to you. So with that, I'd love to introduce my friend and colleague, Gloria Bruce, the Executive Director of East Bay Housing Organizations, who's going to kick us off with a discussion, as I said, of some of the ways in which affordable housing policy and planning issues relate to land recycling. Gloria?
Thank you so much, Victor. Great to be here with you, and I really want to thank Center for Creative Land Recycling for having me and Victor on. Thanks to Meredith and Miriam for inviting us and their support in this. I'm very excited to see 40 people on this session, and I know from your names, I know none of you, and that's really exciting because I speak a lot to other people in the housing field, and I don't speak as much as I should to people outside it. So as Victor said, we are not here on experts on what you're experts on. I'm not going to be able to answer in depth your questions about remediation or things like that on affordable housing sites, but what I am here to do is to try, as Victor was saying, to make some of those connections behind why affordable housing is such an important use for land recycling and how we can bring these solutions together a little bit more and really be creative on it. What I'm going to do is really make a pitch for affordable housing as a great use actually for infill and for brownfield uses, and also focus a little bit on public land as a really important tool for that. Now, I want to be really conscious that while I haven't been able to attend the whole conference, I did watch the opening session, and I was really happy to see that the panelists there, who include some folks I know well in the housing world, really made these connections between the housing affordability crisis, the legacy of redlining, environmental justice, climate resilience, all of that. And, not surprisingly, the maps that you saw in some of those presentations, the same areas that suffered from redlining and disinvestment due to active government policy are the same areas that now have heat islands and the same areas that have environmental hazards, et cetera, et cetera. And so it's really important when we are talking about affordable housing that affordability is key, but I always say affordable housing isn't affordable if it's not quality, healthy housing, because then there are other costs on the people living there. So how do we make sure, especially if we are building on sites or in neighborhoods that have challenges, that we are advancing racial and social equity and health equity rather than replaying some of the same mistakes of the past? And later you're going to hear from Victor about a couple of important policy tools such as Senate Bill 1000, adding an environmental justice element to general plans. And I want to emphasize that these very wonky sounding policy tools are actually, if we can make them accessible, are actually incredibly important to bringing community into the conversation. For many years, the affordable housing field has relied on what's known as the housing element, which is another required piece of general plans in California communities. And it's this very wonky in the weeds document that talks about where are you going to put affordable housing, how much are you going to build, but it's a very important accountability tool for advocates, lawyers, builders, others to say to a community, are you planning for affordable housing? Are you thinking about this carefully? So those tools really do matter. So I'm going to talk about how affordable housing developers build and strengthen communities, even in places that have environmental challenges. What I'm going to do first is put it in the context of how we think about affordable housing solutions in general. So I'm going to try to share my screen really quick. Hang on just a moment. Uh-oh, not that. I don't know, I've probably been on about 500 Zooms and I'm still not always great at sharing screens. Let's do it this way. All right, and let me go to my slideshow. There we go. Okay, so that's just my title slide. That's not very interesting. Let's go to what I'm talking about here. Okay, So I wanted to just introduce you all to a framework that a lot of us in the affordable housing field are using as we talk about how to address this unprecedented housing crisis, in particular in the Bay Area where I am, but of course throughout the state. We think of this as the 3 Ps. And those Ps stand for production, preservation, and protection. Production is pretty straightforward. It means making and building more homes that people can afford. Most of the folks that my organization works with are organizations that are actually nonprofit builders of subsidized affordable housing. So in today's presentation, when I say affordable housing, I'm generally talking about homes that are restricted to be below market rate and do have some form of subsidy to make that possible. So officially affordable housing. And we need to build as much of that as possible. And so that's the production side. I actually like to call it creation because I don't like thinking of housing as a product, but that doesn't work as well for the alliteration. The second piece is preservation, which is really about saying if there are homes, either subsidized homes or homes in the private market where people are already living, let's make them as healthy as possible. Let's improve them, let's make them seismically sound, let's make them healthier and more green, and let's keep them affordable. So there's a lot of that going on right now, especially as we're seeing people kind of get forced out from homes, and with the crash in the economy, how can mission-driven and nonprofit developers acquire more homes and get them into community-oriented hands? And then finally, protection, which is more of a people-based set of strategies. The first two are more focused on the properties themselves. And that is about keeping people in place through tenant protections, through anti-displacement policies, making sure we don't have more people slipping into housing instability and homelessness. So today I'm mostly going to just focus on production, but we work on all 3 strategies through advocacy and education. And I actually really like thinking of land recycling as actually another way of that you're preserving and protecting land as well. So let's see here. So the primary purpose of the housing developers that we work with is to get people indoors and get them in safe and stable housing, especially when we have a pandemic and when we have wildfire smoke that's you know, an incredible environmental hazard to people who aren't stably housed. But as I said before, if that stable housing is not healthy, then it's not ultimately affordable or best for people. And we keep exacerbating the inequities that have been visited on, in particular, Black people, brown people, people with disabilities, veterans, et cetera, who have traditionally had the fewest housing choices. So how do we ensure healthy housing on environmentally challenged sites? Well, affordable housing developers actually do this all the time. And it's important to note that most infill urban sites have some degree of environmental issues, as you probably know. You know what, I'm gonna stop sharing for just a moment because I'll come back to pictures later. And when I was talking to one of our nonprofit developer members about this, she said, well, in a really built out area like the East Bay, we work in Oakland and surrounding cities, both high opportunity and lower opportunity neighborhoods actually, when you're looking at infill, there's a possibility of there being some remediation sites pretty much anywhere. So it comes with the territory for a lot of affordable developers that they're going to be having to deal with some degree of cleanup and or remediation. And our members are actually very used to working on challenging sites and with weird infill sites. And really, it's all about they will do that if the broader location is going to forward equity and opportunity for the residents. So if you're looking at places that are connected to transit, if you're looking at places that are near jobs, near transportation corridors, near other amenities, chances are that's in a fairly built up environment, even if you're in a suburban or exurban community, and there may be something there to address if it's an accessible site. Perhaps it was a former gas station, or perhaps it's near some sort of point source. So for example, right now in downtown Oakland, one of our member developers is building a property called Embark, which is specifically for low income veterans. And it's a great location from the perspective of it's near bus lines, it's near a BART station, there are grocery stores not that far away, it's a walkable neighborhood, it's also quite close to a freeway. So there are some specific issues that have had to be addressed there. And one of the things that I want people to take away is that what we all need to be doing is advocating for affordable housing, for more resources and more places to build it. Because while, as I said, most of the time when you're doing infill urban development, there may be some issue nearby. and I've seen more than my share of market rate properties right next to freeways, as well as affordable properties, new affordable properties right next to freeways. We shouldn't force affordable housing developers into the situation of having to choose some of the most difficult or challenging sites to provide healthy homes for people. And that is a tension that I think we're still dealing with. Because that's a tension, the affordable housing developers that we deal with are quite experienced at building mitigations into their plans. The air filtration that we need if we're near a freeway, and of course today with wildfire smoke, affordable developers were actually some early adopters on a lot of green building multifamily techniques. And that's partly because the competition for affordable housing financing in California is so tight that, first of all, the standards are pretty high. They're able to draw on public financing for these issues, for these types of enhancements. And also, if you wanted to compete to get funding, especially in the Bay Area, you have to show that you have green building, that you have a transit accessible location, et cetera. So this is really common. And the main thing is just that, you know, you may have to scrape the dirt. You may have to have an extra really, really high quality windows to block noise and high quality HVAC. But the thing to note is that these developers are in it for the long haul. This is not profit motivated housing that's meant to be flipped. This is housing that in most cases, the affordable developers have at least a 55-year affordability requirement from their public financing and other sources. This is housing that people are meant to stay in until they can graduate up to something else if they can, but they're welcome to stay. And so it's really made to be sustainable for the long haul. I want to just give a couple quick examples before I close and turn it back to Victor. So I'm going to go back to sharing that presentation. I'm going to find the right slide first, though. All right. Okay. This is an example of a property by one of our member developers, the East Bay Asian Local Development Corporation. This is the California Hotel in Oakland. And you can see in this picture right here, that's a freeway right there. And so there was a lot of mitigation that had to be done during the rehab to make sure that especially these apartments on this side really didn't get, you know, the worst impacts of that. But one of the things that was pointed out to me by someone who worked on this property is that this is a historic hotel that sits on a commercial corridor in Oakland that used to be one of the great bustling areas for Black economy, entertainment, nightlife district. This is a really historic spot where Billie Holiday came to perform, things like that. Now it's housing for extremely low-income people. And this was here first. And so to the challenge that some people might say of, well, this is not great. We have folks living right next to a freeway, and I would agree with that. But I would also say West Oakland is a community that was torn apart by freeways. There were amazing community assets before that. And what we're doing here is actually reinvesting and recycling this property to be a place that, again, can be a hub for a healthy community and making that building and that property as healthy as possible. There's a community garden in back, which unfortunately you can't quite see from this picture, but it's there. And yeah, there it is again. And then I just wanted to show this. This is, now we're looking at the back of the property. And this is a vacant lot next door that the same developer acquired and plans to build affordable housing on, but they decided to give it a really innovative interim use, which they call the Spark It place instead of marketplace. And it's kind of this outdoor multi-use market area where that they've been able to activate instead of just leaving it as a vacant lot while they go through the entitlement and the cleanup process. And that's been a really cool model. And I also just wanted to show you another property. If you're actually driving on this stretch of the 580 where you just saw the California Hotel, you'll also see on the other side another property called the Ambassador. And this is also built by a mission-driven nonprofit. And this is actually the lower density side of it. We have a couple of townhouses, but you also see, and this is when the place was new about 5 years ago, there's a lot of raised beds here. There's a community garden. Those, of course, have grown out by then. And that's something else affordable housers really try to do, is to say, you know, is there green space nearby? What else can we do to be enhancing the living environment and the health of this space? And this is just another shot of the Ambassador. So on the project level, we're doing a lot to try to make these spaces as healthy and green as possible. I also just want to go back to one last example before I close. Yes, another place where this really comes into play is on city-owned or publicly owned land. That's a place where from the beginning you can build in environment and affordable housing together, and we get a lot of leverage in the public process. We believe in public land for public goods. We've done a lot of advocating for large percentages of affordable housing in huge master planned communities, such as this one in the city of Concord in Contra Costa County, northeast of Oakland. I still do that. I've been out here for 15 years and I still get my west and east mixed up. And as you can see, this is a former military facility. This is called Bunker City. Right here, and you can see the rest of the city beyond it. It is a huge piece of land, and we advocated years ago that when this gets built out over the periods of 20, 30 years, that 25% of the homes there be affordable to people of lower incomes, including people who are formerly homeless. And this just kind of shows you a very early rendering of what a land use plan might look like for that area that you just saw. Here's the bunkers. Those are not going to they're not going to build right there. You'll also notice that little BART icon. There's a BART station there. And so we realized, hey, there are significant mitigation issues. There's a ton of cleanup that is still happening. And this is an extraordinary opportunity to get people close to jobs, close to transit, and to use the public process to do that. And we're also leveraging something called the Surplus Land Act, which is a statewide law that requires now that if a public entity no longer is using land and wants to put it out for sale and lease, that they have to put it out to affordable housing sponsors, and there's a minimum of affordable housing that has to be built on that site if they do develop it as residential. And we were a big part of advocating for that law. So I think I've gone well over my time, but I really just wanted to emphasize the themes of building in inclusivity, affordability, and environment from the ground up, from the beginning, and that affordable housing developers are trying to be really strong partners in that, though I think we can always be doing more around climate resiliency and environmental justice. So I will stop there. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Gloria. You know, actually, using an example of the California Hotel from the East Bay Asian Local Development Corporation reminds me of a way to reinforce some of the synergies you're talking about, because Ebaltsi, a community development corporation of longstanding, really a national leader that we're really proud of to be from Oakland, is one of those that has adopted health equity as the core principle for their work, and one that has also made arts and culture absolutely central to all of their development. So when you look at that outdoor space, the Sparkit space, and you look at the larger strategy behind and the context of the California Hotel, you can see a community development corporation interested at a very fundamental level about health equity, about environmental health, about landscaping and landscape development, parks development in all of its elements, cultural as well as environmental. And it's just very gratifying to watch them evolve over the last few years and to see in community development corporations around the country, affiliates of NeighborWorks America, LISC, and the enterprise community partners, a similar sensibility. And I think that informs a lot of the project development they do on sites that have needed remediation and in general. So there's something bigger going on in the way that affordable housing developers, community developers are making use of the sensibility and the knowledge here. So with that in mind, let's think a little about environmental justice, which you may either recall or have learned, depending on how old you are, is that it's really an outgrowth of the civil rights movement quite directly. And its origins in modern day US are really in the South, in Alabama and South Texas and Mississippi. And it was focused on the extreme disparities as to where polluting and noxious and hazardous materials were located and stored: garbage dumps, incinerators, even nuclear waste facilities, various polluting industries, And the original studies that were done were all intended to both document that disparity and then dig deeper into the decision-making processes that led to the presence of far greater numbers of environmentally harmful pollution sources, whether it be water pollution or air pollution, in Black communities and in brown communities, and in leading to the Superfund program, leading to a whole constellation of both strategies and responses in the community. So that the environmental justice movement, as it grew up in California, first with response to, again, dangerous sites and Superfund sites like Stringfellow acid pits and any number of others that many of you are probably more familiar with than I am, has gradually grown into a very diverse, diverse in terms of issues, as well as population involved environmental justice movement. So we're going to talk a little about that and how it has come to be ratified in state policy in a way that will have consequences, if it hasn't already, for the kind of work that you all are involved in. And pull up, can you see in the chat the first three items, which are URLs from the green zones? Can you see that, Gloria, for example?
No, I think those need to get posted again.
Okay, I will do that. There they are. Miriam has just
posted
there
they are.
Again. Thank you.
Yeah.
So I'm going to be sharing some pages from these URLs, and I'm generally hoping you get a chance to dig into them deeper afterwards. So let me get started with what let me say one or two more things. I mentioned earlier the California Planning Roundtable. Now, this is a group of a lot of the most experienced and conscientious urban planners in the state, whether they work for state agencies or local government or their consultants or the university faculty or their, other motley crew like myself. But they always ask this question to say, well, here's a new issue. Of course, we need to deal with environmental justice better than we have. But is telling a city and a county to put an environmental justice element in their general plan the best way to do that? Or are there other ways to do that? And this debate goes on whether you're talking about health, whether you're talking about noise, whether you're talking about environmental justice, whether you're talking about earthquake safety, or almost any issue that Californians need to deal with. Is it putting a separate element, or is it integrating the policies throughout the rest of the plan that will make a big difference? I keep that thought in mind, because what evolved over the last 10 years, every year there was a little more support for institutionalizing the values and priorities of environmental justice in California cities and counties. And the advocates and researchers and specialists and legislators who began working on this gradually decided that yes, county and city general plans are an important target, but we weren't going to specify whether they had to do a separate EJ element or whether they could integrate EJ goals, objectives, and policies into other elements. So that is what we're going to talk about now, the way in which that's being done. Give me a second and I will share my screen. Okay, you should be looking at a page from the California Environmental Justice Alliance, particularly their California Green Zones program. And all thanks go to the coordinator of the Green Zones, Tiffany Eng, at the Cal EJA, who was one of the people behind both the push for this legislation, SB 1000, which was passed in 2016 and began being implemented in 2018 and is now in full swing. What we're taking advantage of here is some work that the California Environmental Justice Alliance did in conjunction with one of the leading consulting firms in the state called PlaceWorks to create the implementation toolkit for SB 1000. And Tiffany and her crew have also created a series of brief fact sheets to go along with it. But the basic idea is the one that I mentioned to you a minute ago. If you look in the upper right-hand corner, SB 1000 was signed into law in 2016, mandating that cities and counties adopt an EJ element or integrate the goals, objectives, and policies into other elements, represents a long-term vision for growth related to land use, circulation, housing, conservation, open space, noise, and safety. In other words, it is not only a specific issue, it's the relationship of that specific environmental issue to all the other components of building a healthy, safe, and equitable community. And the toolkit helps people who are either charged with doing that kind of planning or making the case for certain policies to be part of a city's plan to go about their business. It's organized with one fact sheet for each chapter in the toolkit. And the toolkit as a whole is well worth your time. This URL will take you to a link to the toolkit as a whole. But let's just look at two of these and remind ourselves of some important things. First, most basically, why is this important? And you see 7 reasons why environmental justice and land use are central to the responsibilities of local government and key to any form of land use planning that we can think of. It's not getting to the level of setting the formal legal standards for health and safety for individual sites, but it's a level or two above that about how a community intends to address those challenges, what it wants to do for future zoning, as well as the criteria it's going to establish for particular project plans and reviews that will come before them, including all of the affordable housing project reviews that of the sort that Gloria was mentioning. It's important to remember, as it says in number 3, that this is all in the context of the state laws and federal laws that govern development and govern environmental justice. And also, and this is a big part of the toolkit and a big part of what the advocates have been saying, this is an opportunity for proactive, really effective, authentic community engagement. And elsewhere, you'll see, and I'll guide you to some examples from local planning where residents who previously had not been very much involved had an opportunity to shape the land use and environmental policies of their communities. So in general then, we're in an environment where for the past couple of years, cities and counties across the state have begun to do this implementation. I'm going to pull up a different chapter, chapter 5, so we can get a little deeper into the subject matter. This page called SB 1000 Goals, Policies, and Objectives lists the 8 areas that need to be addressed. And again, you'll see it's pretty eclectic. It's for environmental justice. Pollution exposure and air quality are right up there. And what's called here compounded health risks in disadvantaged communities, often referred to as cumulative impact or various other things that many of you may be familiar with. The important principle there being that you can't just look at one project in isolation, but rather need to see the cumulative and compounded effect, which is often seen from noxious facilities or dangerous facilities being placed in close proximity to each other over a period of decades, or periods where inadequate infrastructure like sewer systems have not been repaired and have a cumulative impact. But then you see these other things: food access, public facilities, which is admittedly general, safe and sanitary homes, which gets back to what Gloria was alluding to, but has a strong implication for land use remediation and recycling. But then it gets into other aspects of health and well-being and makes reference to civil engagement in the process. Reducing community health risks and promoting equitable development and design, and even getting into reducing climate vulnerability. The key here is for cities and counties to have the skill and the focus to simultaneously go broad and cover the issues they need to cover, but be specific enough to give meaningful guidance and not just pie in the sky statements. So what we're starting to see around the country, around the state, I should say, are examples of this kind of local planning. And I'm going to put up here some material from a very recent example. This is from Contra Costa County, and our friends at Placeworks, specifically David Early, the principal of the firm, who helped put this together with his colleagues, showed this presentation, or rather shared this memo after his presentation a few weeks ago at the American Planning Association California Conference. You can see the discussion of goals, policies, and actions for the county on environmental justice. It's a lengthy document. To my mind, it represents really high quality work. You can see that they use Cal EnviroScreen, which you may be familiar with, as a lot of the basis for defining the disadvantaged communities in the county. They did case studies of each of those. I'm scroll through quickly. These are some background resources, some of which we've just alluded to, including the toolkit. But I want to get down to an example of policy guidance where the county can go into its general plan and both create new goals for environmental justice on all of these areas, the first one being about social and economic disadvantage, sanitary homes, health and food, healthy food. You see a replication of the broad issues. But then more specifically in the land use element, the one that might be most important for people doing land recycling. Things like this are cropping up or becoming more common practice around the state. And we can, in the toolkit, you can see references to many of them. The one last thing I'll mention before I close up here is that in the toolkit itself, you see down here a number of case studies. They're all fascinating, and I had the occasion to work on the Richmond one a decade ago, but the one that's most intriguing in this respect and the most compelling in many ways is the one in National City outside San Diego, where a community group of mostly Latinx women who had been suffering through living in close proximity to a lot of metal plating and shops and other sort of dangerous air and water pollution of industrial uses near their homes, became involved not only in getting the zoning redone, but in leading to the building of an ideal new model community of affordable housing and mixed use. And it's quite a fascinating story of both engagement and outcome that I commend to all of you. It won a major award from the American Planning Association and has been, all this was done before SB 1000. That's sort of like an inspiration for it. So there's much more to do and say about that if time permitted, but let's see if we can hear from you, check on the chat, and see if you have any questions for Gloria or for myself. And I see a reference, Ignacio has referenced the National City Project, and it does have some time on it. It began as much as 10 years ago and has been added to. Has anyone conducted a study of what the density is in housing and commercial density to get a mix? Let's see, Gloria, are you looking at that question? Do you have any first take on that?
Yeah, well, and I guess it depends on what Ignacio is referring to, and probably most people on the call know what that acronym is that's there, but just in case you don't, where it says DUA, that's dwelling units per acre. How many homes, whether those are single family or townhouse or apartments per acre are we talking about? And that's a measure of density in the housing world. And yes, if we're talking about something that's a multi-use project in and of itself that has commercial, that has open space, that has, you know, all these other things, like the one you see behind me in my Zoom background. This is Casa Arabella There you go. One of our members, actually the same folks who developed the California Hotel at Balti plus one of their partners. This is next to the Fruitvale BART station in East Oakland. And yeah, you need a certain density for that, but it depends on what you're talking about, because you also can achieve a mix just with one smaller infill project like the Ambassador that I showed you earlier, which is pretty dense on one end, but actually goes down to those townhouses on the other. So I really think it depends on what you're trying to achieve. I also would say the Concord project that I highlighted earlier, because that's so vast, I mean, that's 5,000 acres of worth of development. There aren't too many projects on that scale, but the densities really vary there. So I think their plan is to have more intensive, probably mid-rise development near the BART station as you get further from it, moving to townhomes, to single-family detached homes, and then hopefully using the earlier TOD development to help build that up. But actually, in that market, the master developer, who unfortunately is now the former master developer, and that's a whole other story you can ask me during happy hour. But the original master developer was actually planning on using the sales of the single family homes as a driver to subsidize the affordable housing. So that's just an interesting play on the density issues.
Thank you.
I know we're almost out of time.
Yeah, we're almost out of time. I love the fact that every time you or I have mentioned a project, people in the audience know more about it than we do. It's like which awards they got, how long they've been going. I'm particularly glad that someone, and Noemi, that you mentioned the Environmental Health Coalition by name. And I would mention Carolina Martinez of EHC by name as the driving force for this. But and indeed, the award from APA was actually to her and for the community organizing as much as for the project planning. But they're a member of the California Environmental Justice Alliance, along with comparable groups in every metro area and rural area around the state. And they're an example of a group that has, if you will, moved from protest to policy or from protest to projects. And training planners in official capacities to work effectively with organizations of that sort and building the capacity of those organizations is key to whatever strategy or whatever particular issue we take out. But I think it's particularly important, and SB 1000 really is the product of the work of people like Carolina and Tiffany and the others. And in that respect, even though it's too soon to see the long-range consequences of it, I'm very optimistic that it's pushing California planning in the right direction. Let's see, any other questions?
I think it's really exciting, Victor. I just appreciate getting to learn more about SB 1000 from you and from those partners, because I think, you know, just as I was saying, the housing element for years has been a tool for everything from light advocacy to, hey, time to do a lawsuit if it comes to that, and you know, if a city is not meeting its housing planning needs. And so I think to also weave in EJ with that is really exciting.
I also like making sure people don't just equate environmental planning with CEQA. Like, there's something more to the government infrastructure for environmental equality than just lawsuits back and forth and rather convoluted uses of legal strategies. This is an attempt to get issues on the table and educate folks and move a community forward according to its values. Yeah, we are at 1 minute or less than a minute before the hour. Miriam, any closing?
My goodness.
Thank you so much, Victor and Gloria. If you have any last questions, feel free to send them in, or you can leave them in the housing community thread on HUVA, which there's been some discussion there before from some of our past sessions. I think that just about closes this session. Thank you again, Victor and Gloria. We will see you all at the Brownfields sing-along.
Thank you very much.
Thanks. That went so fast. It was fun. All right.
Yeah.
Thanks so much.
Thank you. Bye-bye.